Dr. Malcolm Kendrick is a GP, researcher and author who's made a name for himself pulling apart the received wisdom of medical science. Malcolm has written a number of papers and blogs stating that we're becoming increasingly subjected to health scaremongering and that many so-called medical facts simply aren't true. Malcolm tackled the truth about heart disease in his first book, The Great Cholesterol Con, and he's now published Doctrine Data, in which Malcolm takes a scalpel to the world of medical research and dissects it. It's very, very interesting. And the truth is, we really, as non-medical people, don't know what to believe. How do we know the truth, Doctor?
A rather big question, that one.
Yeah.
How do you know the truth? It's a very difficult thing. I know that when medical students start medical school, they're usually told 50% of what we're going to tell you is not true or will become obsolete. We don't know which 50%, which is, of course, a bit of a problem. How do we know which are the 50%?
Yeah.
And that's what I've tried to look at in the book.
Okay, let's first of all talk about being overweight and having too much weight on your body and statins and all of that. What do you say about that? I mean, is being overweight going to shorten one's life?
This is one of the things I did look at in some detail. And probably the hardest thing I've ever tried to find was who decided that having a body mass index of more than 30 defines you as being obese. And you think, well, there must have been some big study somewhere. There must have been some huge 70,000 million people studied and very wise people with spectacles on their heads just sort of made this decision.
And a bow tie, wearing
and
a bow tie.
bow tie, of course. Yes. I looked around and eventually the World Health Organization had a meeting, I think 1995, where they said, right, we're going to make a decision on this. And 650 pages later, which I did read, on page 427 or something, I came to this fascinating phrase, which was the reason why we decided that a body mass index of greater than 30 is defined as obesity is largely arbitrary.
Wow. That's a shocker, isn't it?
Well, I'm not shocked because I now know that when you look at all these things, you know, the 5 portions of fruit and vegetables, you try and track down the evidence for that and you find it doesn't exist. You can't find any evidence for this anywhere. It's just something fat bloke said down the pub. And then,
and what about the whole idea of not eating fat? Apparently we can't eat fat. We can't eat butter. I mean, where did all that come from?
oh, now you're going back.
That's a big one.
You're going back to a guy called Ansel Keys from the 1950s, who did a study in which he said, I have proved that saturated fat raises cholesterol levels and cause heart disease. Now, if you look at the actual data, and it's been stripped apart, really and honestly, just such poor research. It's unbelievable.
All right, let's do a few quickies. Half an aspirin a day, good for your cholesterol, good for the heart.
I hate to contradict you in any way, Steve, but it doesn't do anything to your cholesterol level. It does reduce heart disease by a small amount, but more evidence says that it can cause side effects that bleeding into your stomach. And so the general advice now is don't bother. It's not worth it. But then, of course, they then came out and said aspirin protects against cancer, so we should take it to stop getting cancer. So things move along in this world.
All right, statins? Is this a big one? Is this going to take a while?
I do believe that in some people they have benefits. In people who've already had a heart attack or a stroke, there are some clear benefits. But for most people, the average amount of increase in your life expectancy from taking a statin is 0 days, 0 hours, 0 minutes and 0 seconds. So really, for most people, I really don't think so.
Now, in Doctoring Data, Malcolm also asked questions like, is coffee good for you? Will sausages kill you? And should we avoid sugar? Now, is sugar a bad guy?
If you eat too much, yes, definitely. It causes you to release more insulin, and insulin causes you to become obese.
Yeah.
And then that whole pattern of ill health can kick in.
And salt? Too much salt? Bad for you?
Well, I just look at the evidence. The evidence takes me to this point. If you go into hospital and you're really unwell and you're in intensive care, they put up a drip. And the drip has 0.9% sodium chloride in it.
Oh, yeah.
So you get 9 grams of sodium per litre. They give you about 3 litres a day. So while you're in intensive care, they give you 27 grams of salt a day. And then when you recover, and then you can start eating the hospital meals, they're so free from salt, they don't taste of anything.
So how do we find the truth then, Doctor? I mean, where do we turn to? We read online every day, or we read in newspapers, this report, this survey says this, that. Where do we go for the correct information?
Read my book, obviously. But no, I mean, it is a very difficult question. I mean, you go back in history and what people used to do, they now say was completely ridiculous. But how can you know that for sure? It's very difficult. I think it should be a competing discussion. I like to say, I'm putting this out. This is the evidence I've got. Discuss it with other people. But when you read a paper saying sausages will cause you to die of bowel cancer, I generally say, well, any study like that, I know you can just crumple it up, throw it over your shoulder into the bin, because they've just looked at this and they've just done it from a very superficial level. No one's done a study. No one's looked at sausage eating and not sausage eating people. They've just studied people and said, what do they do and what do they get? And that's what they call an observational study. So as soon as you get that, you just know that basically this is nonsense.
What about coffee, just before we take the break and come back and talk some more?
Well, I think that the evidence is that these things are neither bad for you or good for you. And if you enjoy them, drink them.
Okay, there is a thing at the end, by the way, where you say, Malcolm tries to live according to his own philosophy on health, which is simple. Enjoy life, enjoy friends and family, do a bit of exercise, and don't worry too much. There are few things that can't be sorted out by a 12-year-old malt whiskey. Now, I know that you're working as a GP down there in Cheshire. What do your patients say about your notoriety and about some of your views? Or are you not allowed to tell me?
Well, I try and keep this stuff in the background. Say when someone comes to me and says, oh, I think I'm getting side effects, I think it might be due to a statin, I will tend to go, yes, well, it might be true. And I do tell people these are my views.
Yeah.
I will say to them, I would recommend a lot of people not to take these medications. However, these are my views. The general recommendation is X.
And I'm presuming you don't dish a lot of antibiotics out either. I mean, that's probably not your fix, is it?
I try not to. It's very difficult sometimes, and you get mums coming in with 18-month-old children and they've got a high temperature and they're screaming and yelling, and you can just tell that if they walk out with a prescription for an antibiotic clutched in their hand, they'll be happy. And if they walk out saying it's just a virus that will get better, they'll be unhappy. And they might well go and see another doctor the next day, and this can happen.
So how did you kind of meet this challenge? You thought to yourself a few years back, look, a lot of this stuff is nonsense. A lot of what we believe about medical science, what we believe about medicine, what we believe about diseases and all kinds of other matters relating to our bodies is in fact wrong.
I've always got to try and say to people, I believe Western medicine is a fantastic thing.
Yeah.
I'd be dead without it, because I had an appendix burst when I was in Austria and had an operation, and I had antibiotics and I had anesthetics, and I walked out completely well. I don't want everyone to think, oh, this guy's just a complete skeptic. He doesn't believe in everything. We should all go and live in a cave. That's wrong. But the first thing I looked at was heart disease many years ago. Because I was Scottish, when I was in training, Scotland had the highest rate of heart disease in the world, or at least so it was said. And everyone said, oh, it's all to do with deep-fried Mars bars. Well, I've eaten a deep-fried Mars bar, and once you've eaten one, you will never eat another one. It's just a joke thing, really.
Yeah.
It's not true. And so I began to look at it. I believed everything. I believed saturated fat caused heart disease by raising cholesterol levels. And then I started looking around and saying, well, is there anything else? And I looked at the French, and what I found was the French ate as much saturated fat. Their cholesterol levels were exactly the same. Their blood pressures were the same. The amount of exercise they took were the same. They smoked more cigarettes. They ate very slightly more vegetables. And their heart disease rate was a fifth of that in Scotland.
And what do you put that down to?
Well, initially, and I still think it's at least in part true, I think the French are relaxed when they eat. They sit with a family. They have big meal times. It's a very important time in their day. And when they eat, they're relaxed. Their metabolisms are working properly. And in Scotland, the man traditionally came back at 5 o'clock and said, where's my tea?
Exactly like that.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
5 minutes later, had finished eating and was then down the pub. So the Scots' attitude to food was somewhat different.
They always say, don't eat before you go to bed, don't drink before you go to bed. I mean, all that true?
I think good sleep is very important, and that's increasingly clear that that's the case. In fact, there's a lot of people who say that putting on weight, your whole metabolism, everything's affected by poor quality sleep. And sleep hygiene is something I spend quite a lot of time speaking to patients about. I mean, all they want usually is a sleeping tablet, and all I want usually is not to give them a sleeping tablet.
Yeah.
So I discuss all these things with them.
And what do you say? Go to bed early?
I think a lot of people feel they need more sleep than they get. It's not necessarily an early time or a late time. It's when you're ready to go to sleep.
Yeah.
And then so long as you get a certain amount of deep sleep, quiet, restful sleep, you're okay. But it's just this half-waking sleep and the not being restful sleep that's a bad thing.
In your view, do we need 8 hours or 9 hours? Or can some people, as Mrs. Thatcher used to get only, 4 hours, 5 hours sleep and was fully functional, some might say.
I think some people can do on less. In fact, the evidence at the moment is that people aren't sleeping enough.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think they can get by. I mean, Margaret Thatcher is a poor sort of role model for most people, because most people can't manage on that. And if they're getting less than 8 or even 9 hours average, they're struggling and they are affecting their health.
What's your overall message then? Because Tim asked the interesting question, what are we to believe? I mean, we'll read the book and we'll take it in. It's just another person's opinion, isn't it, really? So where is the definitive?
I'd like to say that there was a definitive. That's difficult. I was going to call this book The Dangerous Book for Grown-Ups at one time. That was a working title.
Yeah.
Saying, don't worry about so many things. Most things, really, it doesn't matter. They're not going to kill you. You can eat lots of different things. Outside of a few really killer things like smoking, for example, really most things aren't going to have much effect on you. So don't panic. People have been increasingly fearful of almost everything they're going to eat, everything they do. They're getting screened, they're getting blood tests, they're getting healthy this and healthy that. A lot of this really isn't that beneficial, if at all beneficial. So I think you ought to just be aware that your body will heal itself. You naturally are going to be healthy so long as you do a few things and don't make horrible mistakes with your health. So I think the general message is don't panic.
Okay, don't panic is the message. Dr. Malcolm Kendrick's book, Doctoring Data, is out right now. I guess your next one will be health foods, something like that. That will be your next thing. Where are you going next with this?
How to look slim and attractive using the Dr. Kendrick diet, I think, is because about that sells lots.
As long as it's got whiskey with it, yeah.
It's got whiskey
The
with it.
whiskey diet, yeah.
I'm in. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay.